Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be talking about the 2024 Senate elections, and I'll be giving you all, not only an update on these races, but specifically an angle that I'm going to be taking, I believe, for the next few weeks, which is that the Democratic Party, though unlikely to win this chamber, has a pretty clear floor, and a pretty high one at that, which is good for them because this map is very, very harsh towards them. Now, first of all, what do I mean by that, right? A Senate map can be, pretty favorable to one party or the other, and it depends on what seats are up. So, for example, if we only had seats up in swing states and maybe Republican leading states with Republican incumbent senators, that would be a good map for Democrats because they'd have a lot of room to play offense. The reverse of that is essentially true this year, where we have a lot of swing states, but in essentially all of those states, the incumbents are Democrats, and some states they're retiring incumbents. So Republicans have a bunch of states they can play offense. Democrats, maybe one or two, right? So this map is a lot more exciting for Republicans than it is for Democrats. But again, I think you could say the reverse will be true in 2026 and maybe 2028 to a lesser extent. So with that, let's get into it. Let's talk about the floor that I think Democrats have reached, more likely than not in this Senate maps. But first, though, I do want to get kind of some GOP seats here out of the way because, again, we do know they're likely to go a certain way. Now, I'm going to give the Republicans, just to start out here, 47 seats. I think at an absolute minimum, they're going to win these states. I think that's going to get them to 47. Now, I'm going to add two more here just because I don't want to dwell on these too much. The first is going to be Florida, where the polling average, as we can see here, has stayed pretty stable. Republicans lead by 5 points, which is fine. Even if the race is closer than expected, I doubt Democrats are going to really have a chance to win here, even though, again, some people, there are a lot of people who do want this race to be competitive and do think it's going to be close. I'm not one of those people. Democrats have given us no reason to trust them in Florida in the past 8-10 years. I'm going to stay with the Republicans here. Now, Nebraska is similar. Nebraska to me is, I think, maybe it won't be as close as Florida, but it's still it's really interesting because this is a deep red state that the polls have literally within 1%. Now, what you'll notice is that there are a lot of undecided voters here. Deb Fisher at 44%, Dan Osborne at 43.4% means that we have 12% of voters are undecided, a little more than that. And so you'd expect these undecided voters to be pretty heavily Republican leaning, especially because it's likely that Osborne's locked down all the Democrats in Nebraska, roughly 38 to 40% of the population in a given election. And then he's at 43, so he's probably winning over some independents and maybe some Republican leaning voters. But Fisher, she has a lot of room to grow. She's likely to win over many more Republicans and win this race. Again, we do have some polling that shows Osborne doing well, but these are almost all polls that he has commissioned. He kind of flooded the zone with Osborne affiliated polls, and Fisher's kind of responded to. Now, the interesting thing to note here that I will mention, because I don't want to be unfair to Osborne in my analysis, is that we have two independent polls. The most recent one from Bullfinch actually has him up by 5. So that's something to watch. And I could get burnt on this race on election night, but I'm going to put it in the Republican column just because Nebraska is so red, and because Osborne, maybe he's only down by 1 right now, but on election night, those voters are going to come home for Republicans. And I really don't think Osborne's in a truly competitive race unless he's at 47 or 48% of the vote in the polls. So that's my reasoning. Now, Democrats are going to win a number of seats as well, and we don't really need to talk about these. And just to be kind of broad here, we're going to add in states like Maryland and Maine, right? And then what we essentially have is a battleground map. Now, before we talk about, I think, the truly competitive states, I do want to get a couple of states out of the way here. And actually, when I say a couple, I only mean one. That's Nevada. Now, Nevada, I talked about in my recent Senate prediction more in depth, so go look at that if you want to hear more about Nevada. But Democrats have really run away with this race, and Republicans gave up a couple of weeks ago. They said, look, we have a lot of chances to get the Senate majority. We're going to likely play in the Midwest and in Montana and Texas and maybe in Arizona, although they've actually kind of given up on Arizona too, more on that later. But in Nevada, that was the first state that they really triaged. They were just like, nope, we're not doing this. We're down by 9 points. We've been down by 9 points consistently. Every single poll shows a race that's not competitive. We're done here. And so Democrats, I think that's a seat that I don't want to say locked down because Nevada is still a swing state and, weird things have happened in Senate elections in recent years. But at the same time, this race could not be going worse for the GOP. So with that, I think that we can kind of see where the floor begins to rise for Democrats, right? So what we see here is that we see Montana, Texas, and Ohio as states that are going to vote for Trump, and that Republicans are hoping to win the Senate majority through this path. And it's quite easy for them because they only have to, say they lose Ohio even, they can just win through Montana and Texas, but obviously they want more than that. But just putting those states aside, because I think these states we're not going to touch this video, the 4 states remaining, these are all very close states in 2020. They're going to be very close in 2024. And you can make a case for either Trump or Harris being favored, I think, in any of these 4 states, right? Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, these are quintessential swing states. And Democrats, let's say Harris loses them, I don't think Democrats can lose these Senate races. Now, the first to me is Arizona. Arizona is not going to be too close this year, in my opinion. Now, I do think some polling is actually underrating Kari Lake just because the average is so favorable to Democrats and Ruben Gallego. Let's see if I can find it here on the slider. Gallego's up by well over 7% right now. And the thing about Arizona is that the polls have been kind of all over the place. In 2020, they underestimated Republicans in the Senate race by a good amount. But in 2018 and 2022, and to an extent 2016 as well, Democrats beat their polling. So I don't have too much to say about this. It's pretty clear, where we're headed. Gallego leads by a good amount, and Kari Lake is not a very good candidate. Again, this is what's important to note. Kari Lake, right, ran for governor in 2022, is expected to win broadly. She lost by, just around half a point. It wasn't like it was a blowout. But since then, I think she's really hurt herself because she's made claims that she was, that the 2022 Arizona gubernatorial election was stolen from her. She talked about how obviously she thinks the 2020 election was stolen. And that just doesn't play well in a state like Arizona, where obviously Biden won outright in 2020. And also, there's a lot of moderate voters maybe voted for Trump but don't like the rhetoric from Kari Lake. And that's why in the polling average right now, if you look at the presidential polls, just to kind of pull this up, no pun intended, forgive me for that one, Trump is up by 2 points right now, but Kari Lake is down by 7. So there's a 9-point ticket split between Trump and Lake. And Trump's at 48.6%, Lake's at 43.0%. So there's like a 5.5 point gap to people who just won't vote for Kari Lake or are saying they won't vote for Lake, whereas Gallego's outrunning Harris by around 3.5 points. So it's certainly very interesting at this point in time that Arizona, even if it votes for Trump, I think Democrats are going to win here, right? If you believe the polling delta, Lake would or Trump would need to win Arizona by 9 for Lake to win. I don't think that's actually going to be the delta, but if it's close to that, it's going to be difficult. So to me, Arizona, I'm going to put that in the Democratic column. Now, the next state I'm going to make a similar argument for is going to be Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania has been, in recent days, a lot of people have been saying it's going to be competitive, and Democrats have some reason to be concerned about this race because McCormick has been polling okay in recent, surveys. What's notable here is that we've gotten some pretty good, high-quality pollsters that show, I would say, a fairly close race, right? Like Emerson only has Casey up by 2, which is probably McCormick's best poll of the cycle. Quinnipiac had Casey up by 8, but, it's kind of an outlier. And then obviously we had, let's see, there was a poll that actually had them tied. Here, it was WAPO from mid-September, which is about a month ago, a little over a month ago. They had a tie. So we've gotten a handful of good polls from McCormick in the past month, and that's led a lot of people to believe he's in a close race here. And I think that's true to an extent. Again, Pennsylvania polling, it's not crazy to believe that Republicans are going to outperform their polls here. But again, Casey's up by 5, so he's outside the margin of error. And if we look at the presidential polling, it is dead even right now. Harris is up by 0.5 point over Trump. And again, we've gotten a mix of polling, right? The best polls have Harris up here, but let's say she loses Pennsylvania by even 1.5 points, which would be a lot more than I think she's going to lose it by if she does lose it, right? If you believe the polling delta, right, she's running 4.5 points behind Casey. If Trump wins Pennsylvania by 1.5 points, Casey still wins by 3. In fact, Trump could win Pennsylvania by 3.5, and Casey would still come out on top of her McCormick. So, again, the polling delta there shows that even if we see Harris losing Pennsylvania, and maybe even by a bigger amount than we expect, Casey looks to be fine. Now, obviously, you can dispute that. You can say, hey, look, the polls are going to underestimate the number, or they're going to overestimate the number of people who are voting for Trump and Casey. But again, if you look at the demographic of people who are likely to do that, it's white working class voters, former Democrats, and that's the exact type of voter that polls would actually miss, not oversample. So, all that's to really say, hey, look, right, these races, you can certainly see the delta being enough for even if Harris does poorly on election night in Pennsylvania for Casey to win. Again, Wisconsin's similar. You have another Democratic incumbent who has done well in past elections, whose polling lead is closing, right? So what's interesting about Baldwin is that unlike Casey, I think there's actually some like legitimacy to this polling lead like evaporating, right? She was up by 7 points at the beginning of August. She's now only up by 4. And we have gotten some good polls that like legitimately show a close race here. RMG has Baldwin up by 3. Emerson only had her up by 4. Let's see, what else do we have? She's had some decent leads in other polls. She was up by 2 in the Cook poll, which is really a bad sign for her, I think. And again, Wisconsin over the 3 Rust Belt states we're going to be talking about today. We're not talking about Ohio. We're talking about Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Wisconsin's the state easily with the biggest polling misses in favor of Republicans. So to me, that's a concern for Baldwin. Now, the good news for her is that, again, the Delta, it's pretty comfortable. Right now, the average in Wisconsin is, hold on, let's see. Here we go. Harris plus 0.2. It could not be any closer than that. I mean, a 0.2% lead for Harris. The good news for Baldwin, though, is that that's a 4-point delta. Harris loses Wisconsin by 3. If you believe the polls, Baldwin's still ahead by about a point. So that's good for Tammy Baldwin, and that means that she has room for error. Now, the good news for Democrats broadly in Arizona, in Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania is that A, especially in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, they have incumbents, but B, right, like, I don't think Harris is going to lose these states by any more than a point. Maybe Wisconsin, or even then, I think Wisconsin can be under a point if Trump wins it. I think Arizona has the widest range of outcomes by far of any of these 4 states that we're going to be, honing in on for this video, right? Where obviously I think Trump could win it by 3. I also think that Harris could win it by 3, maybe 2.5. But let's say Trump wins Arizona by 3. That's also the state with the biggest delta between Harris and the Senate Democrats. So if Trump wins Arizona by 3, Gallego, if you believe the polling delta, would still win by 6. So that's a really good reason to argue for him being favored here. Now, the last state I want to talk about is Michigan. Michigan is a bit trickier because there's not an incumbent for Democrats, and I think Republicans of these 3 states have the best candidate in Michigan. A lot of people are going to say it's Pennsylvania. I actually think it's Michigan. I think Mike Rogers has been running a solid campaign here, although Lisa Slotkin for the Democrats has also been doing I'd say a really good job, and she has more experience, politically, which is clearly coming to her aid. And what we've seen is that unlike in Wisconsin, and to an extent Pennsylvania, Michigan Democrats have kind of held on to the same lead. It's gotten a bit smaller, but Slotkin was up by 2 in June. She was up by 4 in July. She was up by, kind of stayed stable. She's up by 6 in September. She's now up by 4. So lead shrunk a little bit, but not to the same degree that the lead in Wisconsin has shrunk. And again, the best polls, they still show a pretty good lead for Slotkin. Again, if we take a look at RMG, Slotkin's up by 4. Morning Consulter up by 7, which is pretty comfortable. Let's see, what else do we have? Emerson had her up by 5. That's the biggest Senate Democrat lead they had in the Midwest. Fabrizio, this is Trump's pollster, has her up by 3. Quinnipiac had her tied, which is, I think, a very bad poll. I think it's probably the worst poll that she's gotten all cycle. But at the same time, they had Harris down by 4. So they still have a 4-point delta, which actually, kind of reflects what we're seeing in the polling averages, where Harris right now in Michigan, is up by about a point. So it's her best state in the Midwest, but not by much. And again, we see about a 3-point delta. So let's say she loses Michigan by 2, which is, I think, way more than anyone would expect. Slotkin still wins by about a point if you believe the polling data. And again, the same thing for all these 3 Midwestern states I said for Pennsylvania, right? And Pennsylvania's not really Midwestern, but Rust Belt is what I meant to say, right? Is like the type of voter that you expect to vote for Trump, but a down ballot, but a Senate Democrat, is a working class white voter and maybe in a rural or working class area. That's the type of voter that usually gets missed by the polls, right? That's why Trump won in 2016, because they didn't wait for education and they got super college educated samples, and then we saw obviously a lot of the polls missing that non-college educated white working class voter. So that voter likely to vote for Trump and down ballot Democrats, obviously if they're splitting their ticket. And so for that reason, I don't think there's going to be like a huge delta polling miss in the Midwest. Now in Arizona, I think it's different. I don't think Gallego is actually going to outrun Harris by 9. I think maybe by 4 or 5, definitely not by 9. Just because that polling miss is, I think, more variable. But again, this kind of shows, to me, the extent to which Democrats have held their ground in this map this year, right? Like a year ago, if you asked me to predict a good election night for Republicans, I'd say, look, they're going to win Nevada, they're going to win Arizona, they're going to win maybe Michigan, and maybe one of Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. But either way, given both the Democrats, the Republicans are winning 55 Senate seats, which is insane to think about. 55 Senate seats is basically supermajority nowadays. But Democrats, they've really forced Republicans out of Nevada and to an extent Arizona. I think these states are the 2 easiest ones. And then if we go back to Michigan, right, that's a state where the polling average looks good for them, despite the fact they don't have an incumbent here, and despite the fact that I think Republicans have run a solid candidate, especially compared to their other candidates in other races, right? Like compared to Kari Lake and Sam Brown, Mike Rogers looks like he's, Barack Obama 2008 levels of strength. So that is what we have to consider here. Now, obviously, we haven't talked really about Texas, Montana, or Ohio. I do think these states are all leaning Republican at the moment, especially Montana, which looks like Democrats are going to, lose that Senate seat quite easily, if we're being honest with ourselves. It's kind of like except for 2020, every year there's kind of a senator who's by election day clearly going to lose. In 2020, we had two. We had Cory Gardner, the Republican from Colorado, whose time was clearly running out, and then we had Doug Jones in Alabama, who won, kind of because of a fluke election in 2017. In 2018, we had actually relevant to this race now is in 2018, we had Democrats in North Dakota, and I think you can argue to an extent Indiana and Missouri, but these races were actually truly competitive. The best example is North Dakota, where Heidi Heitkamp was the Democrat who won by a couple thousand votes in 2012, and she went down by 11 points on election night in 2018. I don't think Tester will lose by 11. I think he could lose by, maybe a bit less than that, though. So to me, this seat is really, really gone for Democrats, and that gets them up to 50, or that gets Republicans up to 50. So if Trump wins the presidency, that's not right. There's a majority for them. If he doesn't win the presidency, they just need to win one of Texas or Ohio, which is no, particularly difficult task. So, make no mistake, Republicans are likely to win the Senate this year. I think it's going to actually be hard for them to not win the Senate. But at the same time, right, like the Democrats have done a good job of kind of holding down the fort, and that's why I do believe that, maybe an upset in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania I could see happening. But beyond that, Democrats should be sitting pretty at 48 Senate seats. And that matters because even though they won't be in the majority in 2026, 2028, they can get back that majority a lot quicker than a lot of people would have expected. So long term, this is absolutely good news for Democrats. So let me know what you all think. Let me know if there's any seats you want me to talk about more. We got 3 weeks to go till the election, so I'm happy to talk in depth about these races now that we have so much data on our hands. So let me know what you think, and I'll see you all next time.